Hey folks, this is Ground Guitar, and today we'll be talking about something a bit different. We'll focus on just one guitar, share some of the weird history behind it, and perhaps shed some light on what actually might be the truth behind the whole thing. We'll be talking about the legendary sunburst Fender Stratocaster that went from Jimi Hendrix to Frank Zappa. As always, we have a more comprehensive list of guitars, amps, effects, and gear used by Jimi Hendrix on our website groundguitar.com. The link will be in the description, and we'll soon have Frank Zappa on there as well. With all that being said, let's get right into it. The uncertain history of the Zappa Hendrix Stratocaster. The story of this guitar begins with the release of the Guitar Player magazine's January 1977 issue, on the cover of which Frank Zappa is seen posing with a battered, visibly burned Fender Stratocaster. On the pages containing the interview conducted by Steve Rosen, Zappa explained that the guitar was given to him by a Hendrix roadie, and that based on the information that he was given, Jimi burned this guitar at the Miami Pop Festival on May 18, 1968. As time passed, Zappa would only occasionally bring up the guitar in interviews, and in one such interview in 1993, he disclosed an important piece of information: that the roadie who gave him the guitar was named Howard Parker, often referred to as H. Zappa mentioned that Howard had stayed at his house for a few months in the late 1960s, presumably after his tenure with Hendrix had ended. According to the book, "Excuse Me While I Kiss the Sky" by David Henderson, Howard did indeed work with Hendrix during the summer of 1968, so that confirms that he was likely there when Jimi played at the Miami Pop in May. And this would be the end of the story if it only weren't for one thing. According to multiple accounts from people who were present at the Miami Pop Festival concert, Jimi Hendrix did not burn any guitars on that particular day. This was confirmed by numerous visitors on our website, as well as people like Ken Davidoff, who took most of the photos that you see circulating around the web from that concert. We even contacted Ken directly via email, and he was very strict and sure that if Jimi had burned a guitar that day, he would have taken photographs of it. Furthermore, even Norman from Norman's Rare Guitars, who interviewed Frank's son Dweezil about this guitar, vividly remembers a lot of details regarding the Miami Festival concert that he personally attended. But he does not mention any guitars being burned, which without a doubt would be the most memorable part of the concert. So it's quite unusual that there is this dissociation present with almost everyone involved. They keep saying that the guitar was burned at the Miami Pop, but no one is able to recall a single memory connected to this. Based on the available historical records, Jimi burned a guitar on 3 occasions. The first instance was at Astoria on March 31, 1967, followed by the Monterey Festival on June 18th of the same year. There is also a possibility that he burned a guitar at the Astoria Theatre in August, although this remains a mystery due to a lack of definitive information. The Monterey Stratocaster is accounted for. It was the custom-painted Stratocaster which ended up broken up in pieces after the concert. And the Astoria Stratocaster is also apparently accounted for, although the history behind this guitar is not completely clear and settled, as we'll soon explain. And the guitar that may have been burned at the Astoria Theatre, assuming it was indeed burned as already noted, remains shrouded in uncertainty. So if we assume that the Zappa guitar is an authentic Hendrix guitar, it implies that the guitar burning incident probably took place at one of 2 concerts, either at Astoria or at the Astoria Theatre. But since the Astoria Stratocaster is a big question mark, let's focus on what we can: the Astoria guitar. The hypothesis that the Zappa Stratocaster could be the guitar that Jimi burned at the Astoria Theatre on March 31, 1967, is definitely one of the more popular ones. There are a lot of details that fit the hypothesis, but then again, a lot of things just don't make any sense at all. To start off, it's important to mention there is a guitar out there that was a subject of an auction in 2008, and it was named the Astoria Strat by the auction house. That guitar apparently spent 4 decades with Tony Garland, Jimi Hendrix Experience press officer, and it was sold for almost $600,000 to an American collector, Daniel Boucher. Upon initial examination, this guitar does seem to match the description. However, there are certain aspects of the story that raise concerns. One major issue is the uncertainty surrounding how the guitar came into Garland's possession. According to Chaz Chandler, the first person to have picked it up after it was burned was Tito Burns, the band's promoter. This version of the story is also confirmed by Jimi himself in the book Starting at Zero: His Own Story. He wrote that it was the band's promoter who picked the guitar and hid it under his coat. Adding to the inconsistencies, Garland claims that he was the individual responsible for obtaining the lighter fluid. However, Keith Altham, who stated that he was backstage with the band that night, asserts that it was Jerry Stickles, Jimmy's roadie, who was sent to fetch the lighter fluid. The significant disparity between these accounts raises doubts about the reliability of the overall story. While it is understandable that memories can fade over time, such stark variations in the narratives cast a shadow of doubt on the credibility of the entire account. Additionally, there is no evidence or sightings of this particular guitar, or one resembling it, in Jimmy's possession during March 1967. Examining the available photographs from that time period, Jimmy is seen using two Sunburst Stratocasters. Both of these guitars were early 60s models with spaghetti logos, whereas the alleged Astoria Stratocaster is described as a mid-60s model with a transition logo. So if we presume that this guitar is fake, which we must emphasize is not what we claim and it's not something we can tell for sure, that means that Zappa's guitar could somehow slide into its place. Before going into clues that could point towards this being the case, let's deal with the nonsense first. In the 2002 auction of the Zappa Hendrix guitar, yes, this guitar was auctioned too, one of the people behind the Cooper Owen Auctioneers, who organized the auction, explained that according to the Hendrix archivists that worked in authenticating this guitar, Jimmy originally burned this guitar in 1967 at the Astoria, and then restored it and burned it again in Miami. Just to point out how unlikely this is, Astoria gig was in the UK on March 31, 1967, and Miami Pop was on May 18, 1968. Between those two gigs, Jimmy had traveled twice to the US and did numerous tours across Europe and the UK. There's no reason to even suspect that all that time he had the Astoria Strat stashed someplace. Also, perhaps more importantly, by that time a new guitar was not a luxury for Jimmy, and no doubt he would just buy a new Strat in the US before caring enough to restore his old scorched Astoria Strat. Certainly there is a slim possibility that the claim could be true. However, as the saying goes, the burden of proof lies with the person making the claim. To finally come to the one clue that points towards Zappa Strat being the Astoria Strat, we have to look at the photos taken at the Star Club on March 18th, some 13 days before the Astoria concert. In the photos, we see a guitar with a scratch on the back, and if we look at the Zappa Stratocaster, we see what appears to be that same scratch. Also, if we look at what is presumably the same guitar photographed from the front backstage at Star Club, we see that the wear around the edges matches the wear on Zappa's guitar quite well too. But regarding this, we must be careful, because the guitar obviously accumulated a lot more scratches and wear before it got into Frank's hands. It is important to exercise caution when making assumptions because, for all we know, Jimmy could have had another guitar specifically intended for burning and destruction at Astoria. But since such a guitar was never seen and never mentioned in any of these stories, you'll have to agree that that version sounds less likely. But despite the plausibility of this hypothesis, we are faced with a similar problem as mentioned earlier. The time frame between the Astoria concert and the Miami Pop Festival spans 13 months. It becomes difficult to comprehend why the burned guitar would still be in circulation and continue to be carried on tour during this extended period. Additionally, it's worth noting that Howard Parker, the individual who gave the guitar to Frank Zappa, was not employed by Hendrix during the Astoria gig. Instead, it was Jerry Stickles who was responsible for taking care of Jimmy's equipment during that period. If we follow the scenario of the burned guitar being retrieved by Tito Burns, we are left with two possibilities. Either it ended up with Garland, or it was kept among Jimmy's other equipment under the care of Stickles. Assuming it remained in the same place, we then need to consider the transition when Howard replaced Stickles and assess how Howard felt it was acceptable to take the guitar and pass it on to someone else. Indeed, regardless of the path we choose in the story, there remains a significant gap in the narrative. So regrettably, the story lacks a definitive and conclusive end, at least for now. Many individuals are often eager to claim that the mystery has been solved, but concrete evidence is necessary in such cases. And it is challenging to ascertain whether conclusive evidence will ever emerge, especially considering that many of the key individuals involved in the story are no longer alive. We welcome you to share your thoughts and opinions on this captivating story in the comments section. Are you inclined to believe that the evidence presented is sufficient to establish the Zappa Strat as the Astoria Strat? Or do you approach the matter with caution, considering the uncertainties and gaps in the narrative? If you enjoyed this little piece of guitar history, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. We would like to give shout-outs to the folks from the Steve Hoffman forums, particularly Purple Jim, who helped with unveiling some of the details, and to all the folks who visited our website and shared their own theories. Thanks for watching.